Hello everyone, welcome to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. We have a variety of things to discuss today, including some signings that include major extensions in St. Louis and Colorado, some big-name defensemen retiring from the NHL, a major trade between the New York Rangers and the Dallas Stars, plus a few possible trade options that could happen between now, which is the beginning of training camp, and the start of the season. And we'll get to all of that right now. Hello everyone and welcome to another video here. I'd like to kick things off today with a few signings to go through. I'd like to start with the smaller of the three, and that is that the Ottawa Senators has assigned unrestricted free agent Tyler Motte to a one-year, $1.35 million deal. Now, Motte is coming off a season where he had 15 points in 58 games with the Vancouver Canucks and the New York Rangers. He was traded at the trade deadline to the Rangers, and Motte is a pretty good bottom six forward. Ever since he came to Vancouver from a trade from Columbus a couple of years ago, he carved himself a really good role on the Canucks' third or fourth line. He mostly did play on the fourth line. He's not too much of a point producer, but for a fourth line player, he can contribute some offense. He had 15 points last year, which is pretty good for a consistent fourth line player. He's dealt with some injuries, but this is a really good signing for Ottawa. The Sens don't have too much depth. They do have a couple of good fourth liners like Austin Watson and Dylan Gambrell. They also have a few younger guys like Mark Kastelic and Igor Sokilov, who could both probably play in the fourth line, but given the fact they're still young prospects who haven't really established themselves in the NHL, they would probably be better to play in the AHL. So acquiring Motte gives them a great fourth line option, and with Alex Formenton not signed yet, it also gives them an insurance piece because Formenton's an RFA, and this could drag out for a while if he's not able to come to terms. So if Formenton's not signed by the start of the season, they could easily slot Motte on the third line with guys like Shane Pinto and Mathieu Joseph. And if they end up trading Alex Formenton, if contract talks don't go well, or if he's out for some of the season, then I think Motte could have a really good chance to be a good contributor on the third line for the Ottawa Senators. But good deal for both teams. The Sens get a bottom six forward who's great, kills penalties as well. He can contribute some offense, so he should help in a lot of aspects of their game. And for Motte, this is a good place. Ottawa seems to be like an up-and-coming team who could make the playoffs this year. So for him to go there and be a contributor, that's good. And he'll be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. So he'll be able to go and sign somewhere else again next year if he doesn't want to re-sign Ottawa. But we shall see how this goes. I think this is a really great signing for the Sens, and I think Motte will do some great things in the Ottawa organization. Next, we have a major extension in St. Louis. The St. Louis Blues have signed young winger Yandle and Kyrou to a 8-year, $8.125 million extension. Now, Kyrou had a breakout year last year. His first full season was the shortened season 2 years ago, when he played in 55 games to put up 35 points, which was pretty good for a young rookie. And then he came into last year and had a breakout season. He put up 75 points in 74 games. That includes 27 goals. So Kyrou proved he could be an extremely useful top six forward last year. Given that he put up over a point per game pace, it's really hard to do in the NHL. So if he can continue to produce something like around this, maybe he puts up 70 points, 80 points. I could see him possibly being a 90-point player at some point. But he definitely seems to be a key cornerstone piece for the Blues in the future. Him and Robert Thomas. Thomas had a extension as well. He had actually, Thomas and Kyrou's extensions were identical. They both had 8-year, $8.125 million deals. And these two are going to be huge pieces of the Blues' future. The Blues have pending unrestricted free agents this year, players going into their final year of their contracts, in Vladimir Tarasenko and Ryan O'Reilly, who are currently really big pieces of their top six, mostly playing on the top line. But if the Blues cannot sign either of those two players, then Thomas and Kyrou are going to become even more important and are going to have to contribute even more, playing higher on the Blues roster. but definitely a good signing for St. Louis to lock up Kyrou. This extension does kick in next year, so Kyrou will be on contract for this year at $2.8 million, and then we'll go to next year at $8.125 million. So great signing for the Blues. Kyrou is an amazing young star in the NHL, and I expect him to improve on his 75-point season from last year. And lastly, one major extension that a lot of people did see coming, but I'm not sure if anyone had this cap hit for him. As Nathan Mackinnon, who was a pending unrestricted free agent going into his final year of his deal, signed a 8-year, $12.6 million contract. Now, that makes him the highest paid player in the NHL. Now, McKinnon is a top 5 player in the NHL, no doubt. I would not sure if I would have given him $12.6 million. I would have said probably between $11 and $12 million, but I can definitely see why. McKinnon is an all-star player and dynamic top-line center. Over the past 5 years, he has had at least a 90-point pace. 3 years ago, he hit over 90 points. 2 years ago in the shortened season, he only had 65 points, but that's once again because, a shortened season. He was on pace for 110 points. And then last year, he hit 88 points, but he did miss 17 games due to injury. So if he had played most of those 17 games that he missed, he would have easily had 90 points. So given McKinnon has consistently contributed around at least 90 points, if not a 100-point pace per year, this is definitely a great signing for the Colorado Avalanche. I don't really think they could go wrong with this. McKinnon is an elite center, and you have to pay them accordingly. And I think even though it's a little bit too much in my opinion, the $12.6 million cap hit is an amazing dollar deal for McKinnon. It actually doubles his previous cap hit, as this is his last year on his previous contract, and he has 6.3, so it goes from 6.3 to 12.6. I know a lot of people have said that McKinnon's deal for this year was a bargain deal, and I don't think they can call this a bargain deal anymore, making him the highest paid player. But definitely great for McKinnon to become the highest paid player. Great for the Avalanche to lock up their first-line center for the next 8 years. I expect McKinnon to help lead the Avalanche to more cups like we saw this past year. Now to some retirements, as 3 long-time NHL defensemen have called it a career. First is Zdeno Chara. Now I think a lot of people did expect this, but Chara has been around the league for an astonishing 24 seasons. He spent the early part of his career with the New York Islanders and the Ottawa Senators, and he spent the last 2 seasons with the Capitals and the Islanders. But he spent the majority of his career in Boston. From 06-07 to 1920, he spent that part of his career in Boston and became a huge major part of the Boston Bruins. He helped the Bruins lead them to 3 Stanley Cup finals, as well as 1 Stanley Cup win in 2011 against the Vancouver Canucks. Chara has definitely been a great player. You don't usually see players getting over 1,000 games played, but he's played 1,608 games. So not only do you not normally see players getting over 1,000 games played, he got over 1,500 games played. He was also a very good contributor on the ice, putting up 209 goals in his career and 680 points, which is pretty good for a defenseman. I definitely think that Chara, who nobody really wanted to get in a fight with because he was 6'9" and would literally just beat up anyone who wanted to take him on in a fight. But he was also a good offensive contributor for most of his time in the league, and really did help a lot of that Bruins core develop into what they are right now. But I definitely think that Chara had a great, amazing career. He was picked in the 3rd round in 1996 by the Islanders, so he's been there for a very long time. And given the fact he was the oldest player last year in the NHL at 45 years old, it's safe to say that it was probably time for him to call it a career, and we all wish the best of luck to Chara. Next is one that was probably expected to happen, but some were surprised, and that is that Keith Yandle has called it a career as well. Now, Yandle has had a pretty good career. He's also played over 1,000 games, putting up 1,109 games in the NHL. He also NHL's all-time leader in the Ironman streak, which is the most amount of games played without missing any time due to injuries, scratches, whatever. He played 989 consecutive NHL games before the Flyers scratched him late during last season. But definitely, Yandle's been an amazing offensive defenseman in his time in the NHL. He put up 103 goals, but 619 points in those 1,109 games played. And he played most of his career in Arizona and Florida. He played in Arizona for the first few years of his career, then got traded to the Rangers, played with the Rangers for a year and a half, and then signed in Florida where he played the next 5 years of his career. He was then bought out last season and signed with Philadelphia and played with Philadelphia this year. But you can see the decline in his point totals. He had usually been a 30-40 point defenseman, but in the last 2 years he had under 30 points, so he was definitely declining. I am a little bit surprised that he didn't go and try and find the third pair role somewhere on a contending team. I think he could have still been a third pair defenseman, but I think given the fact that he's 36 years old, it does make some sense as to why he retired. So we all also wish the best of luck to Keith Yandle. And next we have PK Suban. Now this is one that caught me off guard. I was not expecting Suban to retire yet. He only played 12 seasons in the NHL. He ends up playing 834 NHL games, putting up 467 points. So pretty good career for Suban. He spent majority of it in Montreal. His first 7 years in Montreal before he was traded to Nashville, played 3 years there, and then he was traded to Jersey where he finished out the rest of his contract. Now, he had been a 30-point player for most of his time in the NHL, continually putting up 30 points. He even won the Norris Trophy in 2013. But in those few years with Jersey, he didn't have much point totals. His last year, he did get 22 points, which was his highest as a New Jersey Devil, but he couldn't find the point production that was there with Nashville and Montreal. So I was surprised. I thought he would have gone at least a third pair, if not a top four role with a team. He was one of the more sought-out defensemen after John Klingberg signed in unrestricted free agency. But Suban does decide to call it a career. So the second-round pick from 2007 in Montreal has now retired. So we all wish Suban the best of luck. Now we go on to a major trade that happened a few days ago between the Dallas Stars and the New York Rangers. Now this was a big trade as the New York Rangers sent prospect Nils Lundkvist to the Dallas Stars in exchange for a conditional first and a conditional fourth round pick. Now this is definitely a trade that has its upsides and downsides for both teams. For Dallas, they needed a right shot defenseman. They got Colin Miller in free agency, but he was never going to be the John Klingberg replacement. Klingberg has been a pretty good player, and they were never able to come to a contract with him, so he left via free agency to Anaheim, and that really did have a hole for Dallas in their top four. They still have Heiskanen, they still have Suter, they still have Lindell, but they're really missing that one other piece in their top four, and I think Longfus in time can be this player. He played in 25 games with the Rangers last year at the NHL level and put up 4 points, but the Rangers didn't really see what they wanted from him. They ended up putting him to the minors, call up Braden Schneider, and Schneider ran with the third pair role, so it really didn't leave much room for Lundkvist to find a long-term home in the Rangers organization. So it did make sense for Lundkvist to move. He asked for a trade, and the Rangers ended up accepting. So moving him was a smart move by the Rangers. So while moving him was probably a little bit risky for the Rangers, given he's still young, I think it was the right move because of their deep blue line. Now, in Dallas, I'm not sure if he would get a top four role right off the bat. He might start in the third pair, but I think he would be a consistent in the NHL for the Stars this year. And if he can show enough in a few years' time, he can be a top four defenseman, probably playing on a line with either Lindell or Suter. But I definitely think this is an amazing pickup for Dallas, as Lundkvist could easily be the Stars' next Klingberg. Next, we have the Rangers side of the things, which it did hurt a bit to get rid of a top prospect like that, but they had a lot of good defensemen, so moving him was not really too detrimental to their future. But what they got back was something that I was never expecting. So they got a first-round pick. It's top 10 protected for this year. So if the Stars get a top 10 pick this year, the pick will transfer to 2024, and the Rangers will get that pick next year. But if the pick is from 11 to 32, then the Rangers will get this year's pick from the Dallas Stars. And I think that could be a little bit risky, because if the Stars do miss the playoffs and end up in the 11 to 16 spot, they're giving the Rangers a very high pick. And given this is a deep draft this year, it could be a really, really bad move by the Stars. But to get a top 4 defenseman is the price they have to pay. So the Rangers are able to get an amazing first-round selection for either this year or next. And the 4th-round pick is conditional, as the Stars will give the Rangers a 4th-round pick unless Lundkvist can put up 55 points in this year and next year combined. And then that pick would be upgraded to a 3rd-round pick. So it's either a 4th or a 3rd-round pick depending on Lundkvist's production. But I definitely think that the Rangers got a nice package for Lundkvist, and the Stars get a future top 4 right-shot defenseman that they were really hoping to get to replace Klingberg. And now, some things that I could see happening between now as we start training camp and the start of the season. So training camp starts today. The preseason starts in a few days over the weekend. And I do think that we'll see some trades between training camp and the start of the regular season. So first I want to discuss the Carolina Hurricanes. Ethan Bear, who is a right-shot defenseman for the Hurricanes, is apparently drawing interest, and the Canes are actively shopping him. The Hurricanes have a good couple top right-shot defensemen. They acquired Brent Burns earlier this year. They have Brett Pesce, so their top 4 is pretty settled in. So right now, Ethan Bear would probably be a 3rd-pair defenseman. And as a $2.25 million cap hit, they probably don't want that. They have Dylan Coughlin, who they acquired in the offseason as well. And he could probably fill that right side role on the 3rd pair. Probably to the same extent Bear could. But he is a lot cheaper than Bear. So I think Coughlin makes Bear expendable, and they could trade him. A couple of right shot needy teams would be like the Ottawa Senators, who have been really trying to acquire right-shot defensemen, the Vancouver Canucks, even the Seattle Kraken. These 3 could all use a puck-moving right-shot defenseman. Bear is still, in my opinion, could be a top 4 defenseman. I think that his time in Edmonton was good. I think last year with Carolina, the transition, all of his injury stuff really hurt him. But I think in the right system, he can still be a top 4 defenseman, and he can produce points. So I think that if the Carolina Hurricanes can find a good move that will allow them to free up the cap space by moving Bear, I think they would do that. And I think there should be a lot of teams to consider a Bear trade. And I think that we should expect a Bear trade sometime between now and the start of the season. In Toronto, they still have the contract concerns with Rasmus Sandin, who doesn't seem too willing to sign a contract with the Maple Leafs. Not because of the money. I think the Leafs will be willing to pay Sandin what he wants, but because of the roster positions. He's a left-shot defenseman, and the Leafs have 3 good left-shot defensemen in Morgan Rielly, Jake Muzzin, and Mark Giordano. So there really isn't a roster spot for Sandin. So if Sandin doesn't feel like he has a roster spot, he may force his way out of Toronto. I wouldn't be surprised if the Leafs cannot convince Sandin to get signed. Maybe the Leafs do end up trading Sandin. And I think that would hurt the Leafs a lot, given the fact Sandin is a good, young, possible top 4 defenseman. But it may be what the Leafs have to do. If the Leafs can convince Sandin to resign, then expect Justin Holl to be traded, because they have enough defensemen right now that they should move at least one. If Sandin is convinced and is able to stay, then expect a Holl trade, because the Leafs could use a lot of cap space. And if they have Sandin worked into their top 6, there's really no need for Holl. So a team who, once again, could use a right-shot defenseman. Holl probably plays more on the 3rd pair, but same thing, I think that the Leafs could trade him. And if they can't work out a deal with Sandin and they are forced to trade him, then expect a Sandin deal. I wouldn't be surprised that the Leafs move either one of these defensemen, as Holl is entering the final year of his contract and Sandin just doesn't see a fit for him. So expect the Leafs to move Sandin or Holl in the not too distant future, I would say. And next we go to the Calgary Flames. The Flames, just like these two teams, have a defensive, not issue, but they have a lot of defensemen. The Flames have about 10 players on the defense that are on one-way deals and would need waivers. Now, their top six is pretty settled in right now with Zadorov, Uyghur, Tanev, Shillington, Hanifin, and Anderson. So, a move could be coming for the Flames. Now, Valimaki, who was a former first-round pick in 2017, fell out of favor since Daryl Sutter became coach of the Calgary Flames. And I think that he could possibly be moved from the Calgary Flames organization to maybe have a fresh start somewhere. He's a left side defenseman, but I think that a lot of teams would be really interested in him because he does have high upside. He played most of last year in the AHL, and I think if a team was willing to give him an NHL opportunity, then the Flames should definitely consider it. And they definitely need cap space, but they could be looking for a forward too. So I would say a nice package for them could be like a third-round pick or a bottom six forward. But if not Valimaki, then moves Nikita Zadorov, who I know they just signed to a 2-year, $3.75 million deal. But if they move Zadorov, they can give Valimaki his spot, and then Valimaki is playing back on the team. So expect probably one of Zadorov or Valimaki to be traded. The Flames, I don't think, want to put a couple of their players on waivers if they have to. And if they can avoid that, I think they would. So expect one of those two probably to be traded. Over in Arizona, the Jacob Chychrun saga continues, as Chychrun on Media Day yesterday said that he still wants a trade and a fresh start out of Arizona. There's been a lot of talk about Arizona moving Chychrun since last offseason, really. And I think that a Chychrun trade should be happening before the start of the season. I think Chychrun wanting out is just a distraction for a young team like this. And I think if they were to trade their player, they might do a lot better. Because usually some of these distractions can hurt a team because they still have a player who doesn't really want to be there. But I think if they could move Chychrun, I don't think they'll get their asking price of 2 first-round picks, 2 prospects, and a roster player. But I do think that if they lower their price a bit and get a decent enough package, they should move Chychrun and just be done with it so that they can go on and go forward with their team as it is right now. So expect some sort of a Jacob Chychrun trade to be done. I would definitely say before the season, so this doesn't drag out too long. But I could definitely see Chychrun being moved soon. Next, we go over to Winnipeg, where the Jets want to give youngsters like Ville Heinola and Dylan Sandberg more of a role in their organization. Heinola and Sandberg have both tried for a few years now to try and become regular NHL defensemen, but they really haven't been able to. So moving a veteran defenseman that's already on the team is probably the move that makes the most sense. You have guys like Dylan DeMello and Brendan Dillon, who have 2 years left on their deal. Dillon at $3.9 million, DeMello at $3 million. So I think that if they could convince a team to acquire one of these two for maybe like a second or third round pick, or maybe a middle six forward, as the Jets do have a depleted front end. But I definitely think that if the Jets could move one of these few defensemen and open up a spot on their D pairing for one of their younger guys, they would be a lot better this year. So I would not be surprised if the Jets do end up making a defenseman trade before the season starts. And lastly, with the Montreal Canadiens. The Canadiens have a plethora of forwards. They have about 15 NHL forwards, not including Yuri Slafkovsky, who was the first overall pick from this past year, and would definitely make the NHL roster this year. So you usually have 13, maybe 14 forwards, not 16. So they need to move at least one forward. I think that guys who are going into the final year of their contract, like Sean Monahan, Evgeny Dadonov, and Jonathan Drouin, will all probably play prominent roles to try and increase their value, have good years, and then be traded at the trade deadline. So I don't see any of those guys moving right now. But I could see Mike Hoffman, Christian Dvorak, or Yoel Armia be moved. Armia is a good middle six penalty-killing forward. I'm not sure if he really is living up to that $3.4 million cap hit, so he might be a little bit more difficult to move, but I do think there could be a market for him. You also have Christian Dvorak, a good two-way top six center. a lot of teams could really use a guy like Dvorak. Dvorak didn't have too good of a year last year and dealt with injuries, so some teams may be wary of acquiring him. But I do think that there should be at least some interest in a guy like Dvorak. And lastly, I think Mike Hoffman is probably the most tradable piece. He has 2 years left at $4.5 million, and in the right system, I think can still score 20 goals. Now, this is just me thinking out, but what if the Winnipeg Jets and Montreal Canadiens actually hooked up on a deal? The Canadiens still seem to want a right-shot defenseman who's cheaper, and the Jets need a middle six winger who can help their forward group. So maybe they swap Hoffman and DeMello. DeMello is a good top four defenseman. He's making $1.5 million less than Hoffman, so the Canadiens would clear some cap space. They would get their veteran defenseman for this upcoming season, and then they could move him when he has 1 year left next year. For the Jets, same thing. Hoffman could probably produce 20 points playing with a guy like maybe Dubois, and the Jets have the cap space to take on Hoffman's little bit of extra salary. And if the Jets don't do too well this year, they could probably trade Hoffman next year when he only has 1 year left. So it's just a thought, but maybe a DeMello-Hoffman trade wouldn't be too bad for the Jets and Canadiens. But definitely expect the Canadiens to try and move it forward, and if they can do it, acquire a cheaper veteran right-shot defenseman in the process. So this is all I'm going to talk about today. Remember to like this video and subscribe. Remember, I do a blog, so I will link that in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for next week's video. So remember to stay tuned and keep watching. See you soon.